Alright, with extra emphasis on the eye in alright. There's a specific hunter tool in Bloodborne that is often overlooked. The blackskye eye. No longer encased within its former human or perhaps inhuman skull. But who knows what will be visible to the naked eye for those with eyes on the inside. And something that is definitely quite pleasing to the eye is the S-scaling it has in arcane. Yes, feasting your eyes upon an S can be quite pleasing indeed. And thus, let us go and see what it would be like to go through the game using only the blackskye eye. And in addition to that, we will set our sights upon the arcane stat exclusively. Although that was not even a restriction per se, it's simply the case that hunter tools scale all the way up to 99. One problem though, as you can see over here, the blackskye eye can only be obtained late game, meaning that you can't use it from the very start of the game. However, that only applies to those with tunnel vision, because for a visionary, acquiring it immediately on a fresh character is not mere eye in the sky. So, blink and you'll miss it. There we are. How is that possible? Well, you gotta see it to believe it. Save editor. If you look beyond what is possible within the game world itself, new possibilities will become visible. And if you've never even heard of that before, or heck, never even seen this eye in action, then hey, look at the bright side. You will no longer have to merely envision whether it will require a brand new perspective on strategy, or whether it will make the game so easy that you might as well stare off into space. Alright, time to get the eyeball rolling, and no, your eyes are not deceiving you. Every enemy within my line of sight goes down in one shot, which is quite a sight to behold. And it only requires a single quicksilver bullet per shot. Unfortunately, as we will see throughout this run, it has no eye tracker function installed, and of course it has no rally potential. On top of that, given that it deals pure arcane damage, the arcane resistance numbers that some bosses have can be hard to even look at. Yikes. The range is quite good though, although not infinite. So as you see, you cannot fire as far as the eye can see, but you can only fire as far as the eye can fire, if you see what I mean. But it does have an interesting knockback effect on a lot of enemies, which is especially helpful against humanoids. Also, since we don't need any other items, we can sell them for blood echoes. Because here we have someone I'm always happy to see. My favorite level up waifu. Truly the apple of my eye. Or dare I say, my idol. Does that entail a relationship? It's complicated, but we're definitely seeing each other. Now I'm not exactly sure what kind of animal the cleric beast is supposed to be. Its antlers suggest something like a deer or perhaps even the mythical Wendigo, who apparently utter the same types of death shrieks when they go. But in my eyes, this definitely counts as a bullseye. Although the fact that you are reliant on the lock-on, and enemies either have only 1 or 2 lock-on points, that might cause you to miss when they start flailing around, and it already lacks any sort of tracking. But other than that, this fight becomes extremely easy this way. You have range, and he does not, and there are even additional bullets in the arena itself if you need them. So easy in fact, I almost could have done it with my eyes closed. Perhaps a good thing after all the extreme challenges I have done before, which I have lost a lot of sleep over. After all, I never get sufficient amounts of shut-eye, as you can see from these bags underneath my eyes. Then again, perhaps I should store those in a closet and the ice cream in a freezer, but I guess I don't always see things clearly. Even so, we still have an advantage over the next boss, who literally has his eyes covered. And in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And he might be hiding a beast inside, but I can see right through him. Especially by first luring him up the staircase, so that I will have a clear line of sight, And as I mentioned before, this attack looks quite stunning, breaking many of his attack animations. So there we go, let's finish him off with a shot right between the eyes. And so, all in all, he is... Oh, whoa, 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 whoa! Damn it, you need a microscope to see his health bar at this point. Yeah, I know I usually have a very calm demeanor, but when something like that happens, I lash out.
That was a wink, but you don't know it because it's just an eye.
Okay, I'll see myself out. Perhaps I should go and see a doctor now. Or a therapist, perhaps. Or an exorcist. Look into my eyes, you will see what you mean to me.
Didn't you see the warning?
Yeah, of course I saw that. I have 3 eyes now. And you might have a bird's eye view, but can you see that I soar through the black sky? And then, oh, what the actual hell? Huh, I guess that Jura regards when I soar through the sky as an eyesore. Okay, now I'm angry. If looks could kill. Well, actually, they can. And quite efficiently so. And if you look carefully, you can even see where you landed. And the badge might be gone, but if you quit out, it will reappear right before your eyes. Which makes it quite ironic that I couldn't see where my own bloodstain was from the previous death. So, well, rip those blood echoes. However, you can also make purchases with insight. Now, I did have my eyes set on Gascoigne's set for the higher poison resistance, but with Jura defeated, we could go and purchase his set as well. However, with the right eye covered, that would require me to turn a blind eye to the internal logic of the game, since that should prevent me from attacking altogether, but it's ironically merely a visual obstruction. Although it would be understandable if you wouldn't even want to see all the horrors that this world has in store for us. But surviving a horror game takes balls, so it might as well be an eyeball. Hey BSB, go and look what's over there. Yes, even the monsters themselves need to learn that when danger lurks around every corner, you need to have eyes in your back. Although I myself need to look out that I don't spam my attack too much, because the lock-on combined with the flailing of this flailing flayed beast could potentially cause my attacks to miss. However, and I didn't even know about this, despite the fact that this former Blood Saint isn't exactly much of a looker anymore, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Because my eye is so stunning that I can even cancel her giant poison explosion. Wow, I have never seen that before. In fact, we can look forward to a lot more of those types of situations. However, there is something that will allow us to look forward, and is also something that I almost never see. Namely, the monocular to put the game into a first-person view. Based on my medical insight, I can determine that this person died from getting killed. Regardless, how practical is this thing? Well, the problem is that I apparently don't have any depth perception. But at least it does turn the game into a first-person shooter. Although I'm not the first person in this game to turn this game into a first-person shooter. But I thought I would at least shoot my shot. By the way, if we go and collect the doll set, and if we then inspect the doll, and then change our perspective, we can see that we have become lookalikes. Huh? Aw, that even brought a tear to her eyes. Although, in hindsight, she might require some glasses.
What? What is this?
Preferably with 20/20 vision, but let's not make a spectacle out of that. After all, ironically, being a 4 eyes in real life myself, when I use the monocular to see through my character's eyes... oh wait, that's not even true, it's a shoulder view for some reason. But the real irony is that using the monocular makes it harder to see what's going on. However, if you are perceptive enough, you would have realized that the church in Yharnam was based on Catholicism. So, after suffering that initial defeat against the vicar of the church, I desire biblical talionic justice. An eye for an eye. The law of retaliation, in case you don't know what lex talion is. Unfortunately, a downside is that she only has a single lock-on point, meaning that without the monocular, you can't really aim at her limbs, meaning that getting limb breaks is mainly a matter of luck. And you know me, when I try to gamble on getting lucky, I usually end up throwing snake eyes. Also, speaking of visibility, like the cleric beast, she does seem to have the appearance of something like a deer. But especially since she is supposed to serve as a shepherd to her flock, despite not representing a sheep, when you get behind her, it does seem like she is trying to pull the wool over your eyes, given how your vision is getting obstructed. However, when you think about it, that does make sense, given the fact that our eyes are yet to open. Then again, I have a beastly sight as well, and now with the moon in the sky, it's time to stalk my prey in the night, and I'm watching them all with the eye of a tiger. But with the password and another eye, namely that of the blood-drunk hunter obtained, we have access to the woods and the DLC. However, dealing with the DLC early on, with their massive health pools, yeah, that might be a hard pill to swallow. So instead, I decided to go to the witches first. Although it felt inappropriate given the theme of this round to get rid of my insight first, but fortunately the threat of their minions was minuscule. And despite the fact that the witches are literally covered in eyeballs, the witches themselves said, "Oh, whoa, hold on a second." Wow, I definitely did not see that coming. And I also definitely needed to thoroughly look around for the second witch, because under normal circumstances I already cannot see which witch is which witch. And since these arcane projectiles don't make the witches bloody, I don't even have a visual aid to aid me visually. And thus, let that be a lesson: if an easy fight gives you trouble, remember that another word for problem is you. But as a reward, we first of all get the bloodshot eyes, which on first glance doesn't look like much, but it is actually the real password that we require.
Yes. Password? Bloodshot.
Eyeballs. Yeah, they first gave you the wrong password, but I saw right through that, because my vision is augmented. But of course our second reward was the rune tool, and that means that we can go and acquire... Oh, hello. I didn't even see you there. Well, he definitely isn't much to look at, and I don't think he feels so well. But in addition, there is a secret passageway that is easy to overlook. But if you keep your eyes peeled, which, by the way, what kind of an expression is that? That sounds more horrific than all of the horrors combined in this game. Like a horrendous medieval torture method. But regardless, if you go there, that provides us with 2 additional runes for extra bullets. And, hold on, what is this? Messenger Urn Festival. I'm not even sure if I ever even looked at this one. Predilection to the dark... What the hell? I never even seen that word before. So I guess I have to look it up. But be that as it may, the messengers can have their festival. Because in my eyes, they've earned it. In fact, when I give it to them, I'm sure they will all be stumped. And on top of that, as a Dutch guy, I quite fancy the idea of turning the messengers into potheads. Although I'm not sure how they are supposed to even be able to see anything like that. But unfortunately for us, now we cannot even see the forest for the trees. In fact, an interesting fact, although we can speak to Patches in this little shed, allow me to shed some light upon the fact that you cannot actually see Patches through the cracks. You do see someone, but it's the model of a regular enemy. It doesn't even seem to be Patches in a human form or something. I don't know, that's kind of a missed opportunity, I suppose. But fortunately, I didn't miss the opportunity to become invisible by obtaining the blue elixir. However, even if I had immediately used it, that would not have mattered to the seeing eye dogs outside that can smell our presence. Yeah, I'm not dealing with that. See you later, doggies. Oh, and by the way, do you see the discoloration on the water caused by oil? Well, I did not see the oil. Oh well, I'll live. Or, maybe not. Well, that's exactly why we picked up the blue elixirs. Now you see me, and now you don't. Now, when it comes to what I'm wearing, I obviously have to make sure that I look the part. Or, as we would say over here, het oog wil ook wat. And you cannot spell NPC without C. However, appearances can be deceiving, because I initially thought that Walter's set would be the perfect outfit, given that his helmet only has a single eye hole. But it's on the wrong side. I needed it to be the right eye. But the left eye is not the right eye, it's the wrong eye. So whoever decided to make the one hole the wrong hole is an a-hole in my eyes. Then again, if I truly want to serve as eye candy, I could just be in my underwear. Although, these kinds of underpants won't exactly make anyone fall in love at first sight. So I suppose the only eye candy will be the type of sweets that I'm snacking on in order to see myself through this ordeal. Although, oh damn it, I think I ate too many of them. I guess my eyes are bigger than my stomach. I suppose I simply should have gotten a lollipop instead, which doesn't appear to be theme appropriate at first glance, but it is when you realize it's from the brand Look-a-Look. Or a lollipop eye. That would have worked as well. Regardless, speaking of NPCs, he never even saw it coming. And although he can actually block my projectiles, he can't do it effectively. Shields are nice, but not if they engender passivity. But the reason I went here first is to get to the Nightmare Frontier. Yes, we can barely even see the amygdala who teleports us there, but to be fair, we don't get to see much of the amygdala inside the Nightmare either, given that not only her arcane resistance is quite low, but with her head as the weak point, when using a fast and spammable projectile, this is the type of fight that will be over in the blink of an eye. By the way, on the way towards Miss Amy G. Dalla, we encounter a Winter Lantern, which is an enemy who can kill us by merely looking at us. But finally, after all this time, we can see eye to eye. Now that's the true talionic justice that I mentioned before. Maha! A moment like that is definitely something that I would label as peak. But of course, when you don't see eye to eye with someone, you need to make up. And the perfect makeup for that is eyeshadow. Perfect for against free shadows, keeping us in the dark of what secrets are hidden below and beyond these graves. And we are about to blow the eyelid off that entire mystery. However, the fact that I have such fire in my eyes also caused me to, get fire in my eyes. Because using lock-on against free targets can get pretty messy, and you especially need to look for safe opportunities to make blood bullets, because remember that we only have base level vitality for the entire playthrough. So even if you can't survive at full health, you probably won't survive if you deplete a third of it voluntarily. But the fact that each attack breaks their attack animations, and the fact that I even managed to implement the sidestep cheese tactic using a hunter tool instead of a melee attack, meant that the secrets of the shadows were quickly brought to light. And of course, as a Dutch guy, I have an eye for cheese in the first place. However, a simple NPC can be more of a challenge than even a triple boss fight. And using this attack on her didn't look very promising, meaning that my chances of victory went up in smoke. Now, I could simply avoid her altogether, but that did prevent me from acquiring the Eye Rune from Master Willem. And as my fellow countrymen can probably relate to, when I first saw that that rune even existed, my immediate reaction was, Ik Willem. And speaking of Willem, although I have not actually seen any lore-based texts proving it, that Rom was originally Willem's wife or daughter. Nevertheless, we can have an amorous encounter with her on the lake. Oh yes, very romantic indeed. At least it would have been if it was just the two of us, but perhaps we can make it if we try. Just the two of us, you and I. In fact, to my surprise, I could even knock her out of her teleportation. But of course the problem is using the lock-on to target, the right target. Because by attacking her exclusively, there are now spiders as far as the eye can see. And given that ROM is turning like a CD-ROM, that will make the automatic lock-on target her protected skull instead. Meaning that I awkwardly had to manually aim in order to make the projectile go just barely over her head. Because if I wouldn't pay a close eye to the exact elevation, I would overlook her. And thus, with all the damage that I took from both getting hit as well as from making blood bullets, I only barely managed to see it through. However, with the one reborn up ahead, with an arcane resistance that truly puts the eye in high, I first decided to acquire the key to Upper Cathedral Ward, and what the hell? I actually died to the laser? Wow, now that's a rare sight indeed. Not even I can deal with being sniped with laser sight. However, my next observation was even worse. My damage output somehow massively dropped off in Upper Cathedral Ward. despite the fact that I've solely focused on leveling up my arcane stat. Evidently not even an arcane is a crutch that you can lean on. And despite the fact that brain suckers are weak to arcane, and that this attack can stun most enemies, it doesn't appear to have the same effect on these specific enemies. Damn it, now I wish I actually had aligned my brain with ice. So instead, I really have to keep a close eye on their movement. But fortunately, these are the only mandatory ones in the entire game. So once I got the key, out of sight, out of mind, and out of brain. Also, could this serve as my new outfit? Well, even Stevie Wonder wouldn't have to wonder about that one. However, there's an outfit that you rarely even see in any playthrough, mainly because it's so expensive. So it might look a little foreign to you, but the next boss looks downright alien. And although the lock-on once again appeared to be an issue, other than flailing around a bit, when you have the high ground, you can make this boss look like an ass by looking at his ass. And what's beneficial about doing this fight early on, is that we now get the highest tier of Communion Rune, meaning more blood vials, which implies more blood bullets, and with our damage starting to drop off, we are definitely going to need that. Come on, Abritus, at least look at me when I'm talking to you. Well, someone's a bit sensitive. Guess I struck a bit of an optic nerve there. Yeah, getting charged like that by such a cosmic force definitely made me see stars. The thing is that, given that Abritus is similar to Amygdala, me being able to directly hit her in the head, I expected her to be easy like this. But I suppose that was a little bit short-sighted on my end. Even on her broken head, the damage is much smaller than I expected, and if you keep spamming, she will view you as an easy target. Fortunately, I did get lucky and managed to stay outside of her range, and she simply decided to not move forward in the first place. But all in all, guns are great against the Abritus, but the blackskye eye is a little underwhelming. Of course, her arcane resistance is higher than her blood resistance. Regardless, that was still a pretty grim foresight for what to come, because now it was time to return to Yaragul, where the one reborn resides with the highest arcane resistance in the entire game. So therefore I decided to first go and extinguish the light in the Dark Beast's eyes. Well, actually, since he's literally a corpse brought back to life through the power of electricity, he only has empty eye sockets, but he can definitely go in socket when you can stunlock Parl to prevent him from performing any parlor tricks. And then you will see whatever little life was given to him vanish right before your eyes. Yes, the Dark Beast cannot stand the light. Shocking, I know. That's pretty much par for the course at this point. However, in most other playthroughs, the same thing would apply to the one reborn. But that's where this playthrough differs quite a bit. After all, with my damage output this low, sure, it is possible to knock the boss down on the ground, but it simply takes way too many shots. So when you cannot just stunlock it by going from limb to limb, you will need to go out on a limb in order to hopefully avoid his many limbs. So instead, I try to go for the little skelly boy who seems to be controlling the entire entity. After all, hitting that one should deal bonus damage. Or does it? I'm actually not even completely sure. But something else I didn't know is that you can actually stun the boss out of his giant AoE attack. Yet another animation cancel that I've never seen before. Regardless, my damage output was so disgustingly low that it was vomit-inducing. And to make it worse, I already picked up the set of bullets on the top floor, which I shouldn't have, so I could have used them later to restock. So given the amount of hits I took, and the amount of blood bullets I had to make, what normally would be a simple throwaway fight, this time around definitely was more than meets the eye. Regardless, with that done we could enter the Nightmare of Menses. And although I never managed to actually align my brain with ice, the brain of Menses certainly has. And it has been given a special place. A top-down perspective. A room with a view. I see. And I might be able to actually provide a different perspective on the brain of Menses. One that is very easy to overlook. But before we can do that, we need to deal with Mikalash first. However, to my greatest delight, this attack allows you to fight Mickey the Cock-Aged Dicky on your own terms. As I mentioned before, as a Dutch guy, I'm always on the lookout for cheese. And thus, I was able to... really? Well, as I was saying, I know cheese when I see it. In fact, when he goes into his second phase, you don't have to look very far for the next location to cheese him from. You don't even have to lure him down or into the mirror. In fact, I'm sure that he felt so embarrassed that he wouldn't even be able to look at himself in the mirror anymore. Regardless, we were talking about the Brain of Menses before. Well, normally you would take the secret passage at the elevator to make it drop down and then collect the blood rock from there. But what if you don't, or don't even know that that path existed? Well, there is actually a key inside of the maze that provides an alternative pathway. So even though we don't need to go there, let's go and have a little look-see. Because going this direction allows for a quite different perspective as we approach the location of the brain from the other side, while it is still hanging in the tower. Is that beneficial? No, no matter how you look at it, this only makes things worse. But could you actually go and kill it from here? Technically yes, but if you try to get into a staring contest with it, you're bound to end up going cross-eyed and end up underneath a cross. You know, as in a grave. Speaking of which, turning the wet nurse into a dead nurse was arguably one of the easiest things to achieve in this entire playthrough. Sure, she is invisible to the naked eye, but in my eyes, relying on an optical illusion is such a transparent strategy. So, despite technically being the potential end of the main course, this nurse didn't even whet my appetite. Also, at this point, my arcane stat was at 69. Giggity. Well, actually, after one final outfit change, it was already at 70. And doing 69 at 70 is not really all that satisfying anymore. I guess at that age, it's actually a good thing that your vision is starting to go. And I suppose I could have stopped leveling at 67, because then I could have made a pretty 6-7 joke. For those who will turn 70 in about 60 years from now. But I guess that will have to wait for another time. Actually, another thing that will have to wait is Logarius, who I normally would fight before going into the DLC. However, I did have the necessary foresight to save him until after returning from here. And you will see exactly why I made that decision. Now, of course, in the DLC, danger lurks around every corner, but few people ever bother to look around every corner. Because right at the start, there's actually some cold blood there that I honestly almost never pick up or see anyone else pick up. Of course, something that we will have to pick up, and something that is very theme appropriate, is the eye pendant. And it's called the eye pendant because if I want to go up to the research hall, I am dependent on the pendant. Also, speaking of eyes in places where you wouldn't even suspect to find them, if you take a close look at the pebble, a very familiar shape should catch your eye. And that implies that... no, not in my eyes, not my eyes! Well, in a way it would be beneficial to have been kept in the dark, because I'm sure that when you encountered Ludwig's horrific design for the first time, you simply couldn't believe your eyes. Well, he is called an unsightly beast for a reason. Although, even more appropriately, he should have been called an insightly beast, given that he literally has eyes inside of his second mouth. Now that's truly a hard pill to swallow. Just like it was pretty hard for me to swallow the fact that this year counted as a roll catch. Really? Well, I don't see it. Actually, in this game, shouldn't it be called a dash catch? Or a quick step catch? If you catch my drift? Anyway, let's not get side-eyed, or sidetracked, whatever the correct terminology for that happens to be. Ludwig wasn't difficult per se, but I guess I should describe the fight as uncomfortable this way. Because it made sense to me to be slightly at range, given that I am using a range attack. However, that causes Ludwig to use his own range attacks, and that simply gets me out of the flow of combat that I'm used to. And when his light of the moon hits my eye like a big pizza pie, that's more than I can handle. Fortunately, sometimes the developers put some mechanics in place to help you out near the end of a fight. And Ludwig is a shining example of that, with his double scripted staggers. There are more examples of that, of course, but that is simply what you will see at the tip of the iceberg.
Good hunter, have you seen the thread of light?
What, you mean this one? Well, as you probably already expected, fighting the failures with the blackskye eye is about as exciting as watching paint dry. At the very least I could snipe them from behind the sunflower. Regardless, because of their high arcane resistance and even higher health pool, the fight just goes on and on and on, and this is exactly the type of boss I would like to see less of, not more. Which is quite a contrast to the next boss. After all, Maria, you've gotta see her. Well, I suppose that she feels the same about us as she went in for a close-up. Unfortunately, not merely in the cutscene. Because out of nowhere, Maria can suddenly move faster than the eye can see. Fortunately, for the most part, if you manage to keep your distance, she just keeps lore walking towards you. She can dodge, of course, but she was less dodgy than I expected her to be. And another thing that you probably would have expected by now, this attack cancels most of her attacks. In fact, even her jump attack, yet another animation interruption that I've never seen before. Although having said that, you cannot over-rely on this, because of her seemingly random instances of hyper armor. And you have to be especially careful of her charge attacks. But as long as you know what to look for, you will have the ability to avoid those situations. After all, vision without action is merely a dream. Or in this case, a nightmare. On a side note, I have always been disappointed that they didn't give Maria of the Astral Clock Tower an Australian accent. In fact, given the British architecture, there's a lack of British accents as well. Personally, I don't even need to hear someone speak in order to know whether they are from Britain or from Ireland. All I need to do is to look into their eyes. And when I see this colored ring-shaped structure around the pupil, I immediately go, ah, Irish. If you think my jokes are a little corny, yeah, I know. Regardless, when I got to Orphan and saw my damage output against him, yeah, that was not a pretty sight. And when I thought that I perhaps could get some bonus damage from aerial instability, well, in hindsight I think we could rename this boss to the Orphan of Costly Mistakes. Ah, damn it, why do I do something like that? But you know, instead of engaging in the act of navel gazing, I think what you guys really want to see is the full potential of this attack. So, you know what that means.
I'm gonna come.
Unfortunately, a downside of leveling my arcane to max is that we no longer have any use for the doll. So, sorry Dolly, but I think we should see other people. Alright, although I inflict over 25% extra damage at 99 arcane, which is definitely significant, somehow it still feels rather disappointing. But hey, it's Orphan of course, so what can you expect? And also, ultimately, it doesn't really matter, because normally I would have to wait for backstab opportunities, but with this attack, I see opportunities all over the place. But you know what I didn't see about this place? The invisible wall in the middle of the sea. Yeah, I'm not a supporter or fan of cosmetically nonsensical design decisions like that. And they can go and shove the entire game up their brown eye if you ask me. I spy with my little eye something that starts with brutally murdered newborn. Well, actually we're getting almost near the end. So with only Lawrence left as far as the DLC is concerned, I went to collect his skull. And although I have seen the real Vicar Amelia using this attack many times before, somehow I never even realized that she is using the blackskye eye. First of all, I got favorable RNG allowing me to keep cancelling the other one's attacks. I suppose that's just the stun lock of the draw. But more importantly, as a result, I could in fact have my true biblical revenge on her. A true eye for an eye. And as the later head of the church, she should appreciate that kind of adherence to scripture. And if you wonder how the church canon was established in the first place, well, it wasn't about insight at all. It was a combination of leverage and feeling what's inside your chest. And there you go, church canon established. Of course, when I encountered the first vicar of the church and he realized what had happened to him, he couldn't even stand to look at me. But in a way, the fight that follows was way more shameful than that. Because this is actually a pretty good weapon to use against Lawrence. Obviously he still has a very high health pool, and he might have divine authority on his side, But when you can simply go and start blasting, you can Danny DeVito him when he tries to lay down the law. Rinse and repeat. And hey, he might try to put his foot down, but he clearly doesn't have a leg to stand on. So, all in all, that is definitely pretty handy for us. Oh, okay, now I am covering my eyes in shame instead. Regardless, although in most playthroughs, Lawrence turns out to be one of the most difficult encounters in the entire playthrough, which is why I usually leave him until the end of the playthrough, but this time around I chose to leave Martyr Ligarius for the final fight before the actual final bosses. Now why is that? It's not merely because he shares the highest arcane resistance with the One Reborn. No, that's not it. In fact, in his first phase I could practically stunlock him until he switched phases, where normally you would then go for a backstab. However, that might have prevented you from ever seeing what additional effect that transition has to begin with. Namely, that it grants him a projectile deflecting shield. And that's a problem when you can only use a projectile exclusively. Now you can on occasion still get a hit in, but this seems to be completely random. I was hoping that it was proximity based, but even when you attack him as if you are extremely nearsighted, it makes no actual difference. I couldn't find any sort of actual consistency as to why sometimes you do manage to sneak a hit in. However, then something unexpected happened. In fact, I couldn't even believe my eyes. This attack can parry? But that doesn't make any sense. I have hit enemies over and over when in an attack animation and never got a parry before. This attack should not be able to do that. But be that as it may, doing a parry has the same effect as doing a backstab. It removes his shield. Now I have no idea whether this was a developer oversight or something, but I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Especially when we're not dealing one that has its second mouth completely, covered in eyes and all that stuff. And thus, not even an enemy designed to counter projectile spamming managed to counter my projectile spamming. Go and cry your eyes out, Ligarius, but to me those are merely marred tears. And thus, only 2 final bosses are left, but, I do understand that in his old age his vision isn't what it used to be, but, German, could you at least try to avoid my attacks? This is supposed to be an epic encounter between master and student. While on the other hand, this still counts as master versus pupil. In fact, in hindsight, this is what I should have used all the way back when I did the no stamina challenge many years ago. I mean, sure, his weapon is a scythe to behold, but he didn't actually manage to jam it in the eye of the beholder. I do know that there was a very early glitch where this specific attack would only target his peg leg, but they managed to fix that with an eye patch. The same one that prevented people from pirating the game, on a side note. Perhaps a nice hook for another video. So, all in all, I have demonstrated what I wanted to show since the start. That beating the game with the blackskye eye isn't mere eye in the sky. Of course, as always, the moon presence is the true final boss, but hardly ever poses a threat and is usually a... Wait, hold on. Uh-oh. Damn it, I forgot to use the umbilical cords! Out of all the playthroughs I have done in this game, this happened to be the one where I overlooked that mechanic. Well, even without the true final boss, I at least hope that you still regard this video as an eye-opening experience. And hopefully you want to see more in the future. So all that's left to say is, see you next time.